Hi, welcome. Alex Simon, public health advocate with CoPIRG, here today with another one of our conversations from the Capitol, joined by Senator Kevin Priola. Senator Priola sponsored 7 CoPIRG-backed bills this past session on issues ranging from tackling plastic pollution to making buildings more EV ready to reducing tobacco use among our youth. One of those bills introduced a producer responsibility system here in Colorado, which will help cut down on unnecessary packaging and fund a robust recycling system statewide. Senator Priola, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to speak with you about these issues.
Great, thanks. So before we dive into these interesting topics, I was hoping you could share for just a moment with us what motivated you to become a legislator in the first place.
I've always had a passion for issues and policy since I was a young man, paying attention to current events and political news. And a couple of folks came to me back in 2007, 2008, and I thought, why not give it a try? And I was concerned about the direction of my home state, and I still am. So I guess there's still much work to be done.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. And as I mentioned before, HB 1355 will fund a producer responsibility system here in Colorado, which requires producers to pay into a fund based on the packaging around their materials, whether it's cans, bottles, shrink wrap, other material. And then the dues paid will fund an expansion of recycling statewide at no additional cost to the taxpayer. I know the producer responsibility has a lot of kind of new concepts. What was it about the issue or the bill that appealed to you, and why did you decide to sponsor it this past session?
That bill will probably go down as my favorite piece of legislation I've worked on and had the honor to be a part of. It was first and foremost, it was stakeholdered from early summer, and there were a lot of pieces of legislation prior that kind of set up the process of last year's bill. But it was really elegantly put together through a lot of collaboration with industry and local governments and interest groups. And they also borrowed the best ideas from other provinces, Canadian provinces, other states, bills that had been introduced in like New York and other states. And really, in my opinion, came together with a really elegant proposal that should, in the end of the day, benefit consumers and also benefit industry, and that they will have a robust secondary or tertiary marketplace for raw material for their products. And so the costs to industry, given that industry is very good at economizing and can inject scale into whatever processes they decide to dive into, I'm confident that the cost of recycling for all Coloradans will plummet and will be as cheap, or may even be cheaper than just putting things in the landfill. Plus, the benefits to the environment, the benefits to job creation in our state are just additions, great things about the piece of legislation. So I also think it's going to be model legislation for the rest of the country, and hopefully some other states will decide to borrow it from Colorado as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, we know this was a really important issue for CoPIRG, and we know some of the best legislation comes from when there's really robust stakeholder engagement, and it was great to see that as part of the legislative process for this bill. And also just using other states as great models and then creating a piece of legislation that can then be a model for other states to adopt. So a really cool concept and a great issue to work on. I would know, on a different note, you also sponsored a bill, 1064, aimed at ending the sale of flavored nicotine products here in Colorado in an effort to reduce youth tobacco use. We know at one point youth in Colorado were using e-cigarettes at twice or more than twice the national average rate. Why was this bill or issue something that was important to you personally to act on?
Well, yeah, it was important, continues to be important to me personally, because I have children ages 20 through 6 years old, 4 of them. And we've seen, as parents, we've noticed over the last 5 or 10 years, just an explosion of vapes and even marijuana vaping in junior high and high school. So there's a nexus between marijuana industry and also tobacco, and the science on flavors in tobacco shows that it's kind of the gateway to the gateway. So kids prefer or want to start doing something that tastes good. So that gets them addicted to nicotine. And then in many cases, they move on to THC. So there's a lot of nexuses in this, and it's not healthy for our youth, who should be focusing on educating themselves and building their bodies up to be spending time and resources on things that will, when they become older, have really negative health effects, increase healthcare costs, have lost productivity, and just a lower quality of life. So the data spoke for itself, and that's why I was proud to be a part of it. Unfortunately, given how long it took to get through the House and so on and so forth, coming down to the end of session, the bill wasn't able to make it across the line. But I'm also happy to see that the federal government's moving in the same direction. And I'm confident in the coming years that this good legislation, this good policy move will come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And one third issue you worked on that we also supported was a bill that would have made buildings more EV ready. And we know the governor has a goal of getting nearly 1 million electric vehicles on the road by 2030 in Colorado. So we feel it's important to construct buildings that are ready to charge these vehicles. Why did you think this past session was right for timing to act on this issue?
Well, I think it's right, A, because it's the right thing to do, but B, because I follow this industry very close, because I'm interested in it, and also for business reasons. And I think we're at an inflection point, or I know we're at an inflection point where EV adoption is going to start to exponentially increase. And with that, you need infrastructure to keep up, and it's kind of the chicken or the egg argument. So I think there is already a robust amount of EV infrastructure that's been put in along interstate highways, the superchargers. But I think EV infrastructure on commercial buildings that could accentuate that, such as your level 2 charging for people who want to charge at work or charge while they're shopping, just as an option. Maybe someone left their home and didn't fully charge in the middle of the night, so on and so forth. But the governor, I think he had other ideas and wants to work on the issue again next session. So unfortunately, it didn't make it across the line this year. But I think it's good policy going forward. The bill would have simply encouraged pre-wiring, conduits, so on and so forth, because it's easier to build in a certain manner on the front end than to retrofit on the back end. And so that was my hope with the legislation, that it would not only encourage EV adoption for passenger cars, but also EV adoption for like light trucks, delivery vehicles, buses, so on and so forth, which as a native Coloradan, lifelong resident of Adams County, the pollution is just so much worse than it's ever been. We have to deal with the effect of all the pollution being held in because of the inversion off the mountains. So it's like the soup that we live in, and I deal with it daily, sneezing and coughing and blowing my nose, and I know it's a thing because when I leave this area, I feel great, and I come back, and it's like that way. So I've heard from my constituents. The data shows that we're out of compliance with the EPA, and so I thought this piece of legislation was another positive step in the right direction for EV adoption, which I've worked on in the past and will continue to work on in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I agree. It's important to continue to build the infrastructure to give consumers more options of where to charge and where to drive their EVs.
Yeah. And if I could add, it also helps benefit wind and solar adoption, because, wind and solar doesn't always produce electricity when it's needed per se on a residential or industrial level. But if you have a number of EVs plugged in here and there, it can soak up the additional production. So it helps stabilize the grid. It helps lower the cost for all consumers in the grid. And so that's another plus of this kind of legislation.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all pro legislation that can help both lower costs for consumers and be a win for the environment. So we look forward to seeing, what comes up for electric vehicle adoption and getting buildings more EV ready going forward. Before we wrap up, I know you sponsored 2 different bills about protecting pollinators. I was wondering if this was an issue you're planning on continuing working on going forward.
I'm definitely interested in the issue. I think the bill we did get passed, maybe we take a year off or so to see what comes out of it. But in the end of the day, I think just elevating the discussion that there is a problem here that needs to be discussed and the public needs to be aware of. You can't just go in your yard and spray or do whatever you want and think that there are no negative impacts from that. So yeah, I think we struck the right balance to take existing data and see where gaps could be filled at the state level, where the state could interact. But it's unfortunate that it's such a hot potato political issue. There's a lot of rural folks that are concerned that bees are going to be treated in a way that they're not currently treated. But we know that the environment's all interconnected, and if and when one part of the wildlife collapses, it has negative repercussions and negative effects throughout the other part. Case in point, I was reading up on the introduction of wolves back into the wilderness of Colorado and other parts, and what they found out is that it helps reduce like the deer and elk population, not necessarily by wolves hunting them and killing them, but just the mere threat of wolves around reduces the amount of offspring that deer and elk have or attempt to have. So that alone helps with overgrazing and how the watershed reacts from overgrazing. And I forget the details on it, but it even discussed how the rivers started flowing differently in Yellowstone after the wolves were reintroduced because of just how the animals, the deer and elk, reacted, or the deer and elk stayed out of the meadows or stayed away from the rivers longer. So these are subtle little things that, if you don't read in depth on what the scientific data has produced, it's easy to kind of poo-poo and make fun of in a short tweet or bit or meme or so on and so forth. But if you actually understand in depth the issue at hand, then you can make better policy decisions on what's before you.
Absolutely. And we know the bees are small and occasionally seen as a nuisance, but are really a linchpin in our ecosystem and important for maintaining our entire ecosystem across Colorado and our food supply. So we know protecting them is a really important issue going forward.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate your insight and leadership on these issues, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a wonderful day.
Bye. Thank you.